The scroll gives you an opportunity to look beyond the lips of the prophet into the heart and the fears and the feet of the prophet. And I think it's very, very important that we do that, because when we understand who a person is, then we can balance what they say against where they came from, how they feel, and who they really are. Sometimes our greatest messages are never in our lips. It's in our struggle, it's in our pain, it's in our problems. Our human fallacies is what connects us to people. And I think the opportunity to let people know that you're just a guy like anybody else, a person with issues and kids and crises and stresses just like them. It is our similarity to them that makes us relative to them. I don't want to be their hero. I want to be one from among them, because that's who I am.
One of the deepest stories and experiences we've had is when my brother was seriously injured in an automobile accident. And he only had 24 hours to live. I never will forget it. We found out about it early Sunday morning because it happened late Sunday night, Saturday night. One of the deacons came to the house and asked my dad what was the report. My dad said that the doctor had only given him 24 hours to live. One of the darkest days ever in our family. And the deacon says to my dad, you know, you really should be in the hospital to see him. If you only have 24 hours, don't you believe you need to be with him? And my dad was crying. I had never seen my dad cry. And he was tying his tie. He said to my cousin, my place today is in the pulpit, and I'm going to go and I'm going to preach the message of hope. And my dad went to church. He left church, went to the hospital that evening, and my brother was still breathing. He went back the next day and the doctor said, we'll give him 48 hours. 48 hours turned into a week. A week turned into a month. A month turned into a year. And the brother that they gave up to die finished the 12th grade that year and got a scholarship to Southern University. That very brother went on to become a major teacher, and he's been an anchor for our family. He's a brilliant guy, and he's doing outstanding. But that was one of the darkest days. We prayed. Was our faith tested? Absolutely. Sometimes the thought of that is so painful until I don't want to think about it. And yet it is one of those things that when I think back on that and compare it with some of the tests that I have today, it helps me. It inspires me. It motivates me to say that if God could bring us through that, He certainly can help me address some of the things I face today.
The first time I set foot on the continent of Africa was the same year that I went to Israel for the first time. My spiritual motherland and my physical motherland all in the same year. It was really amazing experience. Nothing that I had ever thought prepared me for that moment. And years ago, when people talk about the motherland, I'd laugh and tell them Mississippi was the motherland to me, you know. So I didn't grow up with this big affinity with the dashikis, and I couldn't get my afro to grow, so, you know, it wasn't a big deal. When my feet got off that plane for the very first time, and I filled my nostrils with that African air, and something down in my guts, the very depths of my being, knew that I was home in a way that I had never thought or felt before. It was so mesmerizing that I could not sleep the entire night. And as I walked the floor and listened out my open windows to the Africans harmonize in that unique fashion that only they do, I thought of my ancestors and tried to picture them, if I could, how they left on chains in the bottom of a boat. And I, their great-great-great-great-grandchild, flew back first class. And I kept walking around in their room saying, I'm back. Later, when I got to go to the Ivory Coast and went to the gate of no return, I walked back through the gate in total defiance to say we made it back. It's horrific what our ancestors went through, but to come back somehow broke the curse of it for me. I recognized that ancestry and the significance of it helped to give me identity in a way that I didn't even know that I needed it. For you see, Jakes is a German name, and obviously I am not German. So Jakes is the name of some master that owned my ancestors. But that's not really who I am. And when I got to go to Africa, it did something for me. If I never go again, I've been back many, many times since I've done Dick Wells and philanthropic work, fell in love with it, but I fell in love with it because what makes love really powerful is when it is reciprocal and is mutually gratifying. I got as much as I gave because they helped me with my history and I helped them with their destiny. And I think that every person throughout the diaspora of African descent should pointedly make it your business to experience it, even if you don't think that you need to, because sometimes your soul craves for something that your mind has not been taught to want. And when you get there, you'll know better than you will sitting here thinking about it.
Mahalia Jackson taught me the art of communication. As a lyric soprano, I don't know how I found this out, but somehow or other I found out that if you hit a high enough note, even if it's not a clear and perfect note, it will make somebody flinch. And so I would sing, and when I wanted the audience to flinch, I would hit my high note. That was my stock and trade, my high note. And I would sing that, and then I would look at Mahalia in my ignorance and say, the look would say, now I've done that, follow me, do something, be something now, because I've just got through doing my thing and can't beat that. And Mahalia would sit in the chair and not even stand up and begin to moan. And the spirit that she would arouse without saying a word would affect the entire audience. And I wondered how she did that. I mean, after all, I had hit my high note 3-4 times. I didn't know how she was able to do that. And so I began. She was not a person who taught in words. Now, this is what you do and that's what you do. She wasn't that way. But I could see what she did. And what she did was, we were all young, and before the program, I was interested in, was my hair right? Or what little powder I could put on, did I have that on good? And so we would have prayer, and then the girls would start to primp and get ready to be seen. Mahalia, on the other hand, would go to the farthest corner of the room we were in and turn her back to the center of the room and look into the wall and get in touch with God, so that when she went out, the spirit that was in her was spread over everybody. She obeyed the law. The law is as within, so without. So if you don't feel it, you can't make me feel it. And she taught me that. That is the art of communication. The lessons I've learned from my life, when I look back on them, there were some times that I cried all night long, but I now know that what I was doing in the crying was cleansing myself, cleansing my mind, experiencing what had happened to me so that I could judge it and look at it and not live it again. There are some nights I was hungry. In Chicago, for an example, they plugged my door and I couldn't get in, and there was snowing, a blizzard, and I slept on a park bench in the snow because I couldn't get into my room and I didn't have any family or friends there at that time. But what that did, looking back, was made me know, let the snow snow, the rain fall, whatever happened, because God is taking care of me and I'll be fine. I don't even remember getting cold out there. And I had on sandal shoes and a little light suede coat, but I was there and I sang and I praised God there in the snow on that bench. And I learned from that I can withstand, I can overcome. I have what's necessary to see my way through.
When I get up in the air and I'm flying that plane, I feel a sense of freedom, a sense of, really probably a sense of escape from all of the challenges and the pressures of life and responsibilities. And at that moment, the only responsibility that I have is to fly that plane and land it safely. So all of the challenges of work and the church and family and children and finances, all of those things mean nothing unless I can land that plane safely. I spend a lot of time praying and talking to God while I'm up in the air flying. I feel communion with God, to look over His creation, to be out in the sky and see the beauty of the sky and the beauty of the planet that He made. It's glorious to me, and it's very fulfilling. And when I land that plane and come down and I have a safe landing, it is very, very fulfilling to me. On one occasion, I was coming back from a trip with my wife in the plane with me. And I had checked out the weather beforehand, and they gave me conditions that made it safe for me to make that journey. But when I got to the airport where I was landing, the weather had deteriorated, and the ceilings, the cloud ceilings, were much lower than what they told me they were going to be. And so when I got to the airport, got close to the airport, and had to begin to descend to land, I encountered some clouds that weren't supposed to be at that height. And one of the most horrifying experiences for me was in order to land the plane at this particular airport, I had to see the runway. And I kept going down lower and lower, and I couldn't see the runway. And you have a limit of how low you can go before you have to stop. But I broke the rules. I broke the rules and went lower than I was supposed to go. And when I did that, I found myself in a very dangerous situation. I had to abort what I was doing and go back and come back around and follow the rules. It was horrifying. It was a very dangerous thing to do. And I learned from that experience that what you learn in life, what you learn in piloting, you have to follow the rules at all times. You have to go by what the guidelines are, because if you don't, one slight move away from that can spell disaster. And when I landed that plane finally on that day, it was a rough landing. It was horrifying to me. I was sweating and I was very nervous, but I learned from that experience never to violate the rules again. And the correlation to life is It says Christians, God gives us parameters and guidelines and do's and don'ts. And there's a reason why he gives us those rules. And it becomes critical for us not to break the rules that God gives us, but to live our lives in accordance with what he has established that we should do.
When I was made a bishop, they had this big reception for me at this hotel on the water in Long Branch. And one of my elders' grandchildren, he's in college now, and he was coming up the stairs and said, "Papa," huge hotel, I forget which hotel on the water. He said, "This is it. Who owns this?" He said, "This is it was the Hyatt or I don't know what hotel it was." He said, "This is a hotel." He says, "Do we own this, Papa?" He said, "No, son, this is the, Marriott." I think it was Marriott. "This is a Marriott hotel. It's a hotel." He said, "Oh." Took a few more steps. He goes, "Does Bishop own it?" He said, "No, this is a Marriott." He said, "Oh, does our church own it?" He said, "No, this is the Marriott." It touched me, though, because this young boy, all he's known since he was conceived and into this world, all he's been around was vision and dreams and taking nothing and seeing something come to pass. That's all he knows. So in his mind, as a little boy, he believed that hotel on the water could possibly belong to his grandfather or him. If it didn't belong to him, it belonged to his pastor. If not his pastor, it certainly belonged to his church. That helped me understand that part of my mission is accomplished. At our church, the stained glass windows of Christ, if you look at the feet, they're chains, the hands, chains being broken. And that's part of my job as a visionary, to take the shackles off the minds of the people in the name of Jesus. The shackles that I can't do, can't be, can't make it, and let us know that we can do all things through Christ who strengthens us. And now my job my concern is now, who will I transfer all this vision to?
I met my wife in the 3rd grade. Met her on the playground of my elementary school. We grew up together. I'd known her for 35 years. Went to elementary school, junior high school together, double dated for senior prom. She went off to Tennessee State University, went to school. I stayed home and went to a local college. And I stepped into ministry. And when she came back from school, I knew that that's who I wanted to be with for the rest of my life. We were together 20 years and married 18 years. 16 years into our marriage, she was diagnosed with colon cancer, stage 4. And, we confessed and we believed and we stood firm on the Word of God on a consistent basis. And she passed away about 4 months ago. I think the lesson that I learned in all of that is that, most importantly, that God is sovereign. It's difficult to be without her because she means and has meant so much to me. But her very essence and her footprint and her thumbprint still resonates in my heart and my mind and in my children's hearts and minds as well. I think the most important lesson that I've learned, though, is that God is absolutely a sustainer. I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy, to lose somebody that was the most important person to you in this world, outside of my relationship with Jesus Christ. She was the only person that I trusted outside of trusting him. And to lose someone like that is very difficult. But at the same token, God showed me that in the midst of all of this trauma, pain, because I have hills and valleys every day, what he showed me is that he'll keep me in perfect peace as long as I remain focused on him. And that's been the only reason why I've been able to do all the things that I've been able to do and keep moving and keep functioning, is because I recognize that I'm a weak individual, but when I'm weak, that's when I'm made strong. I remember like yesterday coming in the house and looking at my wife's lifeless body, lying in the bed, and saying the same thing over and over and over again. God, you gotta make this make sense. You really gotta make this make sense, because this does not make sense to me. You know, we've acquired a lot of stuff. Me and my wife, we built ministry together. We have a 20-acre campus with over 250,000 square feet of building space. We probably own, oh my God, at least $10 to $15 million as far as our ministry is concerned in real estate. We had a lot of things going on in the process of building a 20,000 square foot performing arts and educational center, restaurants, recording studios, tons of real estate, personal things that we have done. And I'm like, she's managed all of this. Now it's just me. It's, God, you gotta make this make sense. I would have rather God take me than her. I really would have, because I knew she possessed the ability to maintain and sustain everything that we had. I don't understand it. But I stopped asking God questions. And I stopped when a song came on one day, an old song that I grew up listening to. And the song simply says that we will understand it better by and by. So I don't understand it now. It still doesn't make sense. But I know that God's not going to leave me out there hanging, but he'll explain to me what he was doing it for, why he did it, and he'll make it make sense. My faith never wavered. I believed very strongly that God was going to heal her. And even when she passed, my faith never wavered. What I realized is that, you know, God didn't heal her, but that doesn't mean he's not a healer. And I think that that's what, you know, many people fail to realize. He's still a healer. He may not have healed her. His desire may have been for her to go home and be with him. And, you know, that void is here at this moment in time. But at the same token, you know, God is God. He doesn't change. He's still the same. He's still Jehovah Jireh, Jehovah Nissi, Jehovah Tiskanu, Jehovah Elyon, Jehovah Makadesh. He is still who he says he is, in spite of, and even in the midst of, not answering our requests. So that doesn't change his nature. So because his nature has not changed, my faith will never waver.
My nephew Quinn, who we raised money for in my solo project, raised money for a memorial in his name, died on my birthday about 6 years ago, 2004. Quinn had meningitis. We really discovered it on April 6th. He was dead on April 8th. Now, what was a challenge for me is a couple of years before that, I was having Bible study, and a young lady came running into Bible study with her baby. And her baby had, the doctor said there was a hole in her heart, in his heart. And she came to Bible study and just took the Bible literally. You know, if there's anyone sick, let them come, bring them to the elders. They brought them to the Bible study. I laid hands on this baby and I prayed for the baby. It went back to the doctor and the hole was gone. That was real. It happened. I'm telling you what happened. Quinn got sick and they're in the hospital, and I remember praying these prayers. God, the way you did it for that little boy, do it for my nephew Quinn. I remember calling on him to do it that way, and Quinn died. And in that moment, through tears, but God also helped me to understand that it's all about him and not about us, and not about, and not that we have these gifts, but that it's all in God. It was really rough when Quinn died, but then Quinn's organs were given to another little boy named Othello, who was in Florida. And I watched how the death of my nephew taught me more about God and God's hand in our lives, where the gifts are, where they're not, how God can use our pain to be a blessing to somebody else. And it really then again began to make sense. All things work together for good to them that love the Lord and are called according to his purpose. Quinn's death helped inform my ministry in terms of just putting everything in God's hands and accepting what God allows. It shaped what we did with my music project, because then the proceeds from that went to a scholarship that my sister-in-law started for single women who are sending their children to tuition-based schools.
You know, when I started pastoring, I thought that being Shirley Caesar, the gospel singer, that all of that would carry over into my pastoring. But it did not. I expected the masses. I expected the busloads. I expected my church to be running over because they knew Shirley Caesar, the singer. But God would not have it to be like that. And so consequently, I've gone through times of discouragement. I've gone through times of when I wanted to quit and give up. But because I know a quitter never wins, and a winner never quits, I made up my mind that I'm going to stick with it. It's harder for women pastors. You will find more of a revolving door, if you will, a transit for women. They come, they go, they come, they go. And I found out that a lot of people that have joined our church by the hundreds, many of them have had ulterior motives. Many of them wanted to be connected with me because they thought that they would either sing in my group or that they would get a chance to hang with me or whatever. But their motives were not pure. And as a result of that, I had to wait, and I'm yet waiting that the Lord will send people with stickability, having the ability to stick, not wanting to come and just hang with me and I can't move without them. But what I want a body of people. I want a membership that needs me and need the word that God has placed in my heart and will be there. Because now I'm beginning to feel that those that God sent to me, they can't leave. And those who have come just to be here, see ya.
One of the most pivotal experiences in my life was when I was searching for what I was to be about as a pastor. I was privileged one day to be with a group of clergy, and providentially I sat next to Dr. Gardner Taylor. And I said to Dr. Taylor, after he had congratulated me on being called to St. Paul's Church, I said to him, I'd like to come by and talk with you about how you've been able to do the things you've done. So he said, Johnny, you'll do well, you do well. I said, yeah, Doc, but I want to come over and talk to you about how to get my folk to do. He said, you will do well, Johnny, you will do well. I said, well, Doc, you don't know my people. And I gave that answer as a stock response that preachers give to kind of almost explain their people out of the equation of possibility. So he said to me, that's why God sent you there. So here it is. I was at the age of 26, just getting started. I was like complaining. I saw the negative side of my people. And Dr. Taylor said, but that's why God sent you there. So I saw them as being negative. He basically said, it's your job to positivize them. So ever since then, That's how I see pastoring. I was once told by a friend of mine, he said, Blood, your people think they can do anything, that they can walk water. And I just bowed my head and said, thank you to God, because I think that's what we're supposed to do. I remember a woman out of Bethany Church where I was, Mrs. Hawes, long dead now. When she heard that I was called to St. Paul, you know, she was, oh, you're gonna do good, you're gonna do good. You know, like, how you know I'm gonna do good? You know, you don't know me that well. And you know what she said to me? She said, you be what you think the other person ought to be. Clicked. See, Monday morning quarterbacking is easy. But if you do what you think the other person ought to do, you hold yourself to a higher standard. Because it's easy to critique other people when you don't know what's going on with them. But if you be what you think somebody ought to be, it helps. And I've done that throughout my days. And now it's habit.
When the Don Imus comments were made, Coach Stringer called me, and I didn't know what she was talking about. I had no idea. I hadn't heard the comments. I don't watch Don Imus. And she had her office fax me a transcript of the remarks, and that was on a Friday. And of course, I assumed that the college or somebody would do something that would make this a very short-lived incident. And by Saturday afternoon, what we knew was that Rutgers University had said nothing. In fact, their response was a tag-on to the NCAA response. Rutgers didn't even do a press release. Rutgers simply told the NCAA, no, I'm sorry, the Big East Conference, you say something and we'll say us too. I think the Don Imus Rutgers affair in the first instance is another tragic example of how our culture rewards fame however you get it. That Don Imus is now bigger and richer than he would have been had that not happened. He's a bigger celebrity, he has a more lucrative contract, and it came on the backs of an insult that was aimed at those young women. I think in that instance, he is just another name on a long list of cultural tragedies where we reward people financially and in other ways for being famous without regard to how they became famous. I don't think Imus to this day really understands the depth of inconvenience and pain that he caused for those young women. There are relationships that were ruptured. There are plans that were changed. And I know that there are people who criticize us when we talk about this because it sounds like we're trying to become professional victims. But the reality is that pain is pain, and wounds are wounds. And no one really has the right to tell anyone how much to hurt or how much not to hurt. And I can document for you specific things that have happened that are negative, that would not have happened among team members and coaches had the Don Imus trauma not been imposed upon that group of young people.
In the frustration of wanting to quit ministry, when everything seems to be overwhelming, a lot of times there are, circumstance situations, you get bogged down in operating off what you see. You're trying to do stuff that you feel is good for people. Your basic whole assumption is, I'm trying to do what's right. I'm trying to take care of people. I'm trying to lead, be a visionary and all of that. It just seems like the people around me are coming against me and trying to stop me and all of this. And so with all that, I became so frustrated to the point that I just wanted to throw up my hands and quit. And finally, I got to go to dinner and with Bishop Jakes and his wife and my wife, and we were riding in the car, and I was ranting and raving and just releasing and all of that because I just needed some advice. I needed the most profound word I could possibly get. Actually, I was really looking for sympathy. I was looking for somebody to pat me on the back and agree with me of how life and trying to do right just doesn't pay and all of that. And when I got finished after 30 minutes of just emptying my trash can, and we were still on our way to the restaurant, I paused so Bishop Jakes could give me these profound words of sympathy and empathy and all, and I feel you. And he just said, you wreck your car swinging at gnats. And I wanted to stop my car in the middle of the road and say, what are you talking about? I just poured my heart out to you, and I bled, and I'm bleeding right now, and you're sitting up here giving me a proverb. I said, wreck your car swinging at gnats. And he said, yeah. He said, you're driving, aren't you? And I said, yeah. He said, now if a gnat flew in this car and you started swinging at it and took your eyes off the road, you'd have a wreck, wouldn't you? I said, yes. He said, all them things that you told me about are gnats. He said, because you're actually driving. And as long as you stay focused on what God called you to do, you'll get to where you're supposed to get. And I've never forgot that. And when things start to bug me and agitate me and irritate me, I just call it a gnat and keep my eyes focused, and it keeps me going.
I was on Peachtree Street in Atlanta, Georgia. In a section of Peachtree today that's very well developed. I mean, it's tall office buildings and, it's beautiful restaurants, But in those days, 1969, 70, 71, it was kind of run down and shabby. In fact, what used to happen down in that particular area was they would sell marijuana. A group of students and I had got together, pooled our resources. We were going to buy some marijuana. And we sent one of our colleagues, one of our friends, to go get it. And he went and got it and brought it back. And when he brought it back, threw it on the table, and we rolled it up. And it was what we call slum. It was no good. So he said, where you get this stuff from? I said, well, he said, this white boy sold it to me down on Peachtree. He said, well, we got to go get our money back because, it's nothing but slum. It's no good. So, he said, well, this white boy down there, we got to go. So we all got together, We're going to go down there, find this white boy, beat him up, for selling this slum, get our money back and go buy us some top grade marijuana. So we jumped in the cars, and I remember one of my friends got a gun. And his father had given him the gun to protect himself. They were from a place that was rural, and he was going, so he got the gun. So we get down there, and we're driving along. It's about 3 cars, and the guy in the car, there he is. And the white guy, so sure enough, it was him. We jumped out of the car, pulled the cars over, and chased him down, held him. And, we were going to get our money. We had taken his jacket because he didn't have the money. Take his jacket, and say, you're not going to get your jacket back, and we're going to hold you here until you find out a way to get our money. He said, well, you keep the jacket. He said, I'm going to go get your money. I'm going to go get it for you. So he walked down the street and disappeared. Well, he came back. But when he came back, he had a white motorcycle gang with him. And a fella named Bull, I think his name, Bull. And Bull came, you know, there's about 9 or 10 of these motorcycle guys. And Bull said, I think all you niggas ought to go back to Africa where you belong. So that caused the temperature to rise a little bit, you know. Then we said, okay, the police cruiser came by. So he said, they'll break this up, you know, and we'll just go on back and forget this whole thing. But the police cruiser kept going. So Bull kept on coming, so I said, looks like we're gonna have to fight. So I remember I had on a little jacket, and I remember taking the jacket off. I said, because we can't, there's no place to go. You're not gonna leave your cars down here. There might be 2 or 3 more of us than there are of them, so it looks like we're gonna have to fight. Now this Bull was a real mean looking redneck. And he said it again, I think all niggas ought to go back to Africa where they came from. I said, oh my God. So he saw me taking off my coat. He said, boy, what you taking your coat off for? What you gonna do? So Bull walked right up on us, and we were face to face. So I said, well, it looks like we're gonna have to fight. And then Bull pulled out a gun and pointed it at my head. Now I didn't have a gun. And he pulled the hammer back. And he said, now nigga, what you gonna do? So I'm thinking, you got to understand this, I wasn't bothered by, I don't know what was wrong, but I'm thinking my partner, whose father had given him the gun, was going to pull out his gun, you know, because this was serious business. And he didn't. So I'm saying, oh my God, I may die here. And just about that time, the police sirens came up again. They started coming up the street. When we heard the police sirens, Bull dropped his gun. The rest of the guys I was with started running. For some reason, I didn't run. I didn't, you know, I don't know what it was. It was like a piece. I didn't run. And the guys who were with Bull, not Bull, started shooting. Pow, 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 at the guys who were running. I'm walking. Because I couldn't figure out where was I going to run. The cars were there. And so as I was walking away from Bull, Bull had gone, I don't know where he was. The guy in front of me was shot. He was shot in the ankle. And he was laying there, and he tried to get up, but he couldn't, and he started crying and yelling and screaming. And it was one other guy who was nearby who did come back, and I walked up, and we picked him up and moved him over to the side behind. They were still shooting. Finally, the shooting stopped. You know, I got up and looked around, and the police came. They took the guy who was shot to the hospital. They took me and the other guy and a few others to jail. We were sitting there in jail, and I'm figuring, everybody's got to be somewhere, but what am I doing here? That was a life-changing experience.
The lowest time of my life was in 1989. My wife Cheech and I were struggling, you know, with our ministry. We were part of a ministry organization that was coming against us and was suing us, and it's a long story. It was a very low time. We had lost a number of members from our church. All our resources had been exasperated, and I came to the United States on a ministry trip, and I was invited for some reason to go on a television network called TBN. I'd never heard of it. I didn't know what it was. And they said they liked the range of our teaching and some of my ideas. And so I was asking a friend of mine, talk to me about what is TBN. And they explained to me it was Trinity Broadcasting Network, and it was a Christian network that literally goes around the world. And my first experience on TBN was pretty amazing, because when I began to speak there, I initially felt incapable. I felt extremely incompetent. And in that week, I was put in the same lineup with Bishop Jakes, Dwight Thompson, Rod Parsley, Berlin Renee Morris, and from that moment, all kinds of significant ministry opportunities broke forth. All kinds of doors around the world began to open. And I saw how God could raise a boy that was literally taken from the bush and overnight put them before a screen and lift up their life. And that was a wonderful turning point in my life, because I began to understand that with great power comes great responsibility, and I had to learn how to manage that particular resource. And I had to learn that this was a moment in time that I had to climb up to, and had to equip myself, and I had to educate myself. I had to familiarize myself with that particular world, began to open my mind globally to all kinds of cultures, all kinds of people, all kinds of religious groupings, so that I could be competent, effective, and highly anointed to reach these people. And I think that one moment began to give me the realization that when God has His hand upon a person, no matter how obscure you might be as an individual, when God has His hand upon a person and He regulates that person's life, when your time comes, there's nothing in the world that can stop that time.
I'll never forget this. Probably was 1991, when, I don't know if I was watching ABC, but when they made the announcement, when the announcement was made, and I saw this brother come to the podium and he said these words: because of the virus that I've attained, that I must retire from the Los Angeles Lakers. That I was never really a Lakers fan. I was always a Philadelphia 76ers fan. Mo Cheeks and Julius Erving and Bobby Jones and Darryl Dawkins. That was Caldwell Jones. I was not a Laker fan, but I love Magic. Magic had an unparalleled swagger at that time. The intelligence, the smile. Magic Johnson, before Michael Jordan, was just very well spoken. Magic was a beloved figure, And when he made that announcement, that was huge. It was huge for a young man, who moves from Middle Georgia, from Macon, Georgia, 100,000 people, to move to Atlanta. You're in the middle of Spelman, Clark, Morris, Brown, Georgia Tech, Georgia State. It's one female for every, one male for every 7 females. And I had one item on my agenda, and that was to get all 7 of mine and 7 of somebody else's that didn't want theirs. So to be in that kind of context and to hear this brother with this type of affluence, with this type of stature, to hear him, our hero, just gone. It really made you think that if this can happen to Magic, then it can happen to anybody. So, it helped, I think, for me to really be more wise and more cautious and more prayerful. It put some more safeguards up Because at that time, a lot of guys didn't have any safeguards. You know, it's like whatever, you know. And I think it made us think from a different perspective, you know.
My father he would fondle, you know, and that's what some girls go through with fathers and uncles and grandfathers, fondle. I was never penetrated. I was never touched vaginally or anything like that. Mine was fondling, okay? And then mostly it would be fondling when I was picking his beard. He had ingrown hairs. He would want me to pick out the ingrown hairs. And so I would do that. And then when I picked the ingrown hair, he would fondle me, you know, and I would move and be uncomfortable and that type of thing. But I didn't say anything initially because a lot of young girls don't, you know, because you really don't know. So maybe this is the way dads do with their daughters. Maybe this is the way you get breast, or maybe this is the way it's that. So you begin to rationalize because you really don't know what's going on. You can't define. You've never had sex before. You don't know this is, you know, sexual. You know it's uncomfortable for you. And then the other thing was not wanting to tell anybody, because when Daddy did come around, a lot of times we didn't have food. And so when Daddy came around, he would bring food. So he would bring, you know, a loaf of bread, half a gallon of milk, package of wieners, and a dozen of eggs. So we looked forward to that because a lot of times we didn't have anything to eat. We were hungry. And so if I said something, then Daddy would stop coming around. If he stopped coming around, then none of the other kids, they just didn't know what was going on. It was like, okay, you know, Daddy came by, he would drop by like that. And so, I guess from years that happened for maybe about 2 years, 3 years, I don't recall how long it was. And then it was another uncle, you know, who'd never touched me, but, you know, was always trying to touch me. And then when I lived with another relative, I had a cousin who used to try to sneak in bed with me at night and try to, you know, touch me. It was just she's like always running from something like that, you know what I mean? I was on the 700 Club years and years ago, and it came out in that interview that I used to get up in like an embryo. I would ball up in a knot, and I balled up in that knot. I was wondering, why do I sleep in a knot all the time? Why did I ball up like in the embryo position? Why am I that, you know? And it took some years of the Lord showing me, you know, why I did that in terms of what had happened to me years ago, and then protecting myself. I was always protecting myself. And so I think for me, eventually I just read a scripture. I know it sounds so simple, but I really fell in love with the Word of God. I fell in love with the Lord. And I read the scripture in John 15 says, you are clean through the Word. And I think what really had left me more devastated was the rape than the molestation. Okay, because all of them were like violations. And the rape really, really bothered me. It was a date rape situation. But when I read in the Bible, it says you are clean through the Word. I took that literally, and I began to rejoice in the cleansing power of God and the cleansing blood of Jesus, and I began to feel washed in the blood. I really felt washed and cleansed. And for my healing and deliverance from the errors of molestation and sexual abuse, it wasn't a therapy. I didn't see a psychologist. But let me say this to women who are still struggling with it. I just say it's the grace of God. I'm just blessed. I'm so blessed. I'm not better, I'm not stronger, I'm not smarter. It's just His grace. Because I minister to women all the time, son, who have never told any of the stories that I've told, and I even given you the details, but can't even talk about it because it's too painful. But these women are sitting in churches all over the world. I mean, it's happening in America, happening in Africa, in Asia, in Europe. It's not just unique to people of color. It's women all over. There's trafficking, there's child prostitution, there's child pornography. It's all that same spirit of exploitation, sexual exploitation, and it still makes people feel the same way, makes women feel worthless, makes them feel cheap and dirty. But since I came to the Lord and I began to understand by the washing of the water how the Word cleanses, well, then I've walked in deliverance and healing from that. And it's my prayer that other women will too.
The painting, The Audacity to Hope, I first saw at Virginia Union University in humanities, our humanities course. I think Dr. Johnson, Robert Johnson, was teaching the course, but that's 1959, 1960, so it's a little while ago. But it was a fascinating poem. I heard it, again, come to life under Fred Sampson. Frederick G. Sampson was preaching about it. And it was like he was, Roberta Flack, killing me softly with his song. I remember that painting vividly, and I sat there transfixed because I had never thought sermonically or homiletically about its implications until I heard Fred talking about it. It shows a picture of a woman sitting on top of the world globe, and she's sitting on top of the world playing a harp. Her clothes are torn, raggedy, she got a bandage over her head, and the harp is damaged and only has one string left. And the artist has put these little notes floating above her head, showing that with the one string she had left, she's still making music. And it's called Hope. If I recall correctly, 50, 60 years ago, called Hope. And Fred Sampson used the term audacity to hope. How you have the audacity to hope when everything is wrong? The world is in shambles, and you still talk about hope. Well, it's from that seminal setting, the painting from college, and Fred Sampson that I did the sermon, The Audacity to Hope, and I was looking at something that was just impossible. Hannah, Samuel's mother, she's in the church praying for something that's absolutely impossible. She had the audacity to hope about that. And then I thought about my own parents who had the audacity to hope, and I crafted the sermon as a result of the painting, Samson, Hannah, and my parents. In Scripture, the Christian Scriptures, it says we are saved by hope. But hope that is seen is not hope, because if you see it, why are you still hoping for it? I think it's James Weldon Johnson, 1903, wrote about it. In the days when hope unborn had died, that without hope, people die. Langston Hughes talks about hold fast to your dreams. Well, he's not talking about fairy tale dreams. He's talking about dreams that are founded in a hope that there is a better day, there's a brighter day. I think that that's a consistent message that has been a part of the African American religious experience, both on the continent in terms of African Christianity, origins of Christianity, but in the transatlantic slave trade, the wake of that, how African Americans were able to hold on when everything else said let go is hopeless. That I think is very important today, and I think one of the reasons Cornel West writes about it all the time. One of the reasons so many of our young people have an attitude of nihilism is that they don't have any hope. A lot of our kids I worked with didn't think they'd live to see 25. You talking about college, graduate school, professors? They didn't think they would live. They were hopeless. They had no hope, and I think without hope that anything goes. I mean, there are no rules. It's just live for today. It's about me, selfishness, greed. I can bust a cap in your head. That whole notion of disrespect for human life, whether it's my life, your mama's life, doesn't matter. That is a result of people not having any hope.
Our youngest son was 17 years old, and without my knowing it, he had developed a dependency upon alcohol and a dependency upon drugs. And I was really distraught about it. And in those days, a concept or teaching that said, if your family's not in order, then you don't have a ministry. And so while the rest of my kids were doing great, he wasn't. And so I'm thinking, if I can't get him under control, my ministry is over. And I became so focused on where he was at that moment in time that I lost track of all the other good things that were going on in my life. And so I went to talk to a friend, and on the way to that friend's house, I was so devastated, and I had this thought occur to me. It says, you know what, man, you might as well kill yourself. If this kid isn't going to change, then what's your point? Well, I sat down and talked to this guy, and he asked me what I would call some forensic questions about my life and my marriage. And, well, how are you and Barbara doing? I said, we're doing great. And he said, and how are the rest of the boys? We're doing great. And he said, how's your congregation doing? I said, congregation is doing great. And he said, and how's your traveling ministry? He said, traveling ministry is great. And then he said, so you got this one thing in your life that makes you think it's over. And then this is what he shared. He said, the enemy's job is to take your life and make you see it in one package, that what's going on in your life right now will always be that way. And so he makes it a still shot instead of a moving picture. And he says, so on the other side of that shot that you're looking at right now, all kinds of good stuff. He won't let you see the good stuff that's coming. This is how it is, it's bad, and it's not going to change. And that for me was a defining moment, because I realized that there were so many good things about this young man that I saw in him growing up. Went into the Marines and learned a whole lot about discipline, authority, came out of the Marines, still on drugs, but called me one day when we were in California and just said, just want to tell you, my girlfriend and I, we flushed our drugs down the toilet and we've given our lives back to the Lord. And I remember what my friend said, because in that moment in time, it was a defining moment for me that even though I couldn't see the change in his life, I could believe for it. And that helped me incredibly.
When I look back on my days, on the street selling drugs, there's definitely, I'm definitely reminded of families that were hurt, individuals and families that were hurt by the actions that I had, taken. There's one family in particular that always sticks out in my mind. Young black family, the father was an architect, very successful, had a great house up on the hill, his wife, kids, everything. And so I guess they kind of started using about the time that I started selling. And within that time, that 1 year, it went from them, having these Friday night parties with all their friends over to them calling me every night. They lost their house, he lost his job, and they ended up, it's so ironic because their house was up on this hill in Oakland. And if you know anything about California and Oakland, the hills are kind of the dividing line. So if you have money, you live in the hills. If you don't, you live in the flats. And so their house overlooked the flatlands, is what we called them. And almost like right at the bottom of the hill where they lived were like these real cheap motels where people would live in them. They would you pay a couple $100 for the month and live in these motels. And by the time, they finished, they'd lost all that they had and they were actually living in one of those motels. And I remember seeing them in there one day, I was there for somebody else, and I saw them in there. And I was asking, what are you all doing down here? And then they told me that they live down there. And so even then, in kind of my own messed up state of mind, it just hit me like a brick. It was so fast. The fall was so fast. And, I can think about, mothers who would, give us their food stamps, sell their diapers, it was really a vicious cycle. And I don't know anybody who's ever, lived through that on the side where you did the selling, where you can't walk around and feel some kind of remorse and some kind of guilt about that.
I had a young lady that came up to me. She was the secretary of the organization, And her performance was poor. I had to terminate her. It pained me to terminate her, but when I did so, she flipped out. I have never used profanity in my life, and this girl used compound, profane words to me. And my flesh wanted to retaliate so badly, and I heard the Lord gently say to me, vengeance belongs to me. And a scripture that I had read came to my mind right at that time, that if somebody strikes you on one cheek, offer to them the other also. This was a trying thing for my very soul, because this young woman was being insubordinate, and she did it in front of the whole organization. And I just stood back and allowed her to say all of the expletives that she said. And I paused. And the scriptures came alive to me for the very first time in seeing something that I had read in the Bible being acted out in real life. And he said, turn the other cheek. And he narrated to me and said, when I said turn the other cheek, I mean show her the other side. She has only known profanity and belligerence. Show her the side of love and grace. And I turned the other cheek, and these words came out of my mouth. I simply said, honey, God bless you. Because the word that came to me at that time was bless them that curse you. And I literally blessed somebody who literally cursed me out. And the peace of God came into that situation, because one of the best ways to conquer your enemy is to make them your friend. And something came into her heart, because I would not stoop to her level, but I showed her another side. It taught me how the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but they are mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds. She was totally disarmed. And every time that I have seen her since that incident, she has treated me with the utmost respect.
I was at the University of Illinois one time, and I took a class. To this day, I don't know why I took that class. I cut that class every way but loose. And it was one of those classes where your final grade was based on one paper. Crazy class. I hadn't been to this man's class the whole semester. I cut this, I think I went maybe 2 or 3 times. And by accident, about 3 weeks before the final, I realized just by accident that we had a final paper due. I crammed for 2 weeks, man. I went to the library, I burned the midnight oil, I'm taking notes, and I got note cards and everything, and I'm at my typewriter, not computer back in those. I'm at my typewriter, and I'm typing, and I'm doing, and I turn in the paper. Professor gives the paper back. He writes notes on the paper. First clue is, when a professor writes notes on your paper, you got a problem. Note said, good paper, good content, good research, grade F, and put an F in red letters. F is an F in black ink. I don't know why the man had to put it in red ink, but F in red ink. And he said, notes, good paper, good content, good research, last note. But this was not the assignment. Good paper, good content, good research. Grade F in red ink with a circle around it. This was not the assignment. What gets me up every morning? I have an assignment. And it does not matter how well I do, what I do, if I don't do what I'm supposed to do. I only glorify God to the degree to which I do my assignment. Why do I get up in the morning? I'm on assignment.
Everybody got a testimony. pretty sure we all know how the story ends. John 14:6 explained it to us. So the word said it, so that settles it. Be encouraged, people of God. God is the way, he's the truth, he's the life. You know what I'm saying? I still can't see how I made it to 621. Life just wasn't fair at all, looking through it from the barrels of a gun. Little girls losing hope, y'all. Prostituting at age 14. Teenage boys on the corners looking worse. Jeans sagging down to their knees. Neighborhoods full of crime. Unemployment's at an all-time high. Every time I turn on the news, I wonder why another brother had to die. So now I'll take a stand to do what I can for these streets. We got a hunger for the presence of God to save the souls of our fellow man. Can't quit, can't deny, we can't fold. You gotta try, there's no way, there's no lie. He's the truth, he's the light. So we can't quit, can't deny, can't fold. You gotta try.